Hello, Beyond Broken supporters. I just want to thank you for your support of both Beyond Broken and Justice for Julia. Writing my book has taken a little bit longer than I expected, but just to show my appreciation for you, I want to share some of the content from my book. This first part will be about the funeral. The large blue recyclable container stood at the end of the table. The recyclable bin was set out to show her passion for the environment. She had carried a recyclable tray into the school cafeteria every day and reminded students that they should stop putting the plastic lid on their soda cups since it was not biodegradable. A soft white baby blanket laid on a table. It was shrunk, frayed, and worn. A couple knots had been tied and it had lost some of the whiteness. It was 21 years old. I walked to the open doors leading into the sanctuary. I stared across a large room filled with groups of chairs that had been arranged at different angles. Each chair arrangement faced the altar. In the front of the room, near the altar, was a coffin. I stared at the coffin. I questioned what people meant when they talked about closure. How would seeing her lifeless body bring closure? What did closure mean anyway? People spoke about closure as if you could pack your grief and pain in a box, send it off, and never have it enter your world again. Did the person who first used this word experience loss? All I felt was the ongoing pain and numbness from her loss. This next part takes place on Sunday, March 14th, about 12 hours before Julia died. I remember receiving a text around 4 o'clock from Julia telling me that her luggage had not arrived. I think she told me because she was frustrated, so I told her not to worry and that it would come soon. Other than that text, it was a normal evening. The next morning, I woke up as usual to get ready for school. School started around 8:30 a.m., but I arrived at school about an hour earlier. It was around 8:20 when I came from the front of the room and headed toward Marin's desk to give her a paper. As I walked towards her desk, about a 10-foot distance, I suddenly felt something holding me back. It was as if I paused on the way over to her desk. I felt my body slowing down just for a second, as if in slow motion, and at the same time, feeling something go through my body. It ended as quickly as it came. I handed her the paper and walked back to the front of the room, wondering what had just happened. But I had a class to teach, so it was quickly forgotten. This next section is from January 2014, after I hired cold case investigator Joe Matthews. Marie, you've been victimized twice. Once by the perpetrators who gave your daughter the drug, and once by the Miami Beach Police Department. It's as if we just found your daughter's body today. These words spoken to me by cold case investigator Joe Matthews have stuck with me over the last couple years, since he spoke them to me in 2014, after I hired him to help me. As I look back and recall the short phone call with Miami Beach Police Detective Kenny Matthews in July of 2010, all I really remember is that he told me that the toxicology reports showed a lethal dose of a drug called GHB. After he told me this, there was silence. To be honest, I didn't even know what to say or ask next. I asked if GHB was a sort of date rape drug, and he said yes, it could be used as a date rape drug. This next part is from 2011. After hiring Chris Catania, our first investigator, he recalls his feelings and thoughts and experiences during that year. He says, I emailed Detective Kenny Matthews and waited for his response. Also at the same time, I contacted the medical examiner and had them send me a copy of the autopsy report. I don't remember if they mailed or emailed those to me. Matthews did call me back within a day or two of my emailing him. I introduced myself to him and that I had been hired to look into the case. The first thing I asked him was if any evidence had been bagged and tagged at the scene. It was at this point that Matthews told me this was probably his biggest regret, that nothing other than Julia's personal belongings, suitcase, laptop, etc., had been gathered at the scene. I honestly did not know what to say at that point. I think I was silent for several seconds. I asked Kenny Matthews if it wasn't normal protocol to bag potential evidence at a scene. He gave some response, but it's not always done. Depends on the case, something along those lines. My thought was, you have a dead, otherwise perfectly healthy young female with no outward signs of cause of death, knife, gunshot wound, or anything like that. Wouldn't you want to bag up everything you could until you know what you're dealing with? Kenny Matthews then ran through a summary of the case and said the case had really been hampered by the delay of cause of death from the medical examiner's office. He told me he didn't get a cause of death until September, 6 months after Julia's death. Again, I sat there in silence. I couldn't have waited 6 days, let alone 6 months, for a cause of death. I would have called every day until I had it. I would need to know how this woman died. This next excerpt is from 2012, the summer I went to Africa, and my mission trip experience. I remember Dora as being different from the other women. She appeared reserved as her eyes made contact frequently with the other African women, but otherwise focused on the floor. She didn't smile quite as readily, and she spoke very few words. When she spoke, her voice was deep, and her words were disconnected and difficult to understand. Yet her eyes spoke loudly to me. They told me of a woman who had experienced much in life. They told me that she had longings and pain and dreams. I looked at her and she smiled back, but even her smile wasn't a joyful smile. It was a smile she had learned to put on her face. It was a smile that said, I'm trying to be strong, but I'm here because I know I need God in my life and that you Americans are here because you care. Whenever I had the opportunity, I looked at her and smiled. I wanted her to know that I cared about her. As I look back and think about Dora, I now see that in a certain way, I was Dora. Maybe that's why I wanted so badly to connect with her. My final section is from 1980, my senior year at a sectional track meet. To say I was dejected was an understatement. With a slow, unseen stream of tears and no words, I walked off that track, out of the stadium and into a local neighborhood. The anguish of defeat overwhelmed me, and I felt there was nowhere to turn for consolation. It was over. I couldn't do the race over. It was final. It wasn't until March 15, 2010, that I would experience the magnification of this pain 100-fold, and the finality of a life that would have no comparison with this loss. Finality. You can't really understand this word until you experience the loss of a child. But I had a clue at age 17 what it meant to invest your time, energy, and love into something and then have it abruptly end. There are no words for such a time. Thank you again for your support.